Dear follower, in this video, I'm going to show you how to win at chess no matter what your opponent plays. It really doesn't matter at all what they play against us. I'm going to teach you how you should think and how to come up with a plan to win your game in a pretty straightforward way. I could pick a famous game and show it to you here, but no. I'm going to pick a game I played just a few days ago in the in-person tournament I'm currently playing in. Luckily, or maybe thanks to my skill, I'm currently in first place, my friends. So, with one of my own games, you'll understand perfectly what I was thinking, because no one in this world knows better than I do what was going through my mind. So, I was playing with the black pieces. I'm going to set them up here for you. And I want you to try to enjoy and understand this game, because without a doubt, if you do, your chess level is going to improve a lot. I have no doubt about it. All right. I was facing at board number one an opponent who had studied my games. He had seen that if I played the French defense, which is the defense I was going to use in this tournament, he would play the Tarrasch variation with knight to d2. So I dug a little deeper into his database and saw that against the Caro-Kann, according to this defense here, which you can find videos about on the channel, he also played knight to d2. And even though I don't usually play the Caro-Kann that often, since I know a lot of defenses and openings, I can use it depending on the opponent I'm facing. In this case, my opponent played the variation I expected, and I continued as usual. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and bishop to f5. I have to tell you something. Here, there are two main moves. Knight to f6, facing off these two knights, which will end up with doubled pawns. Or the one I used, bishop to f5. Why? Because I saw that against bishop to f5, my opponent would play queen to f3 to defend this piece. Alright, the move queen to f3 is actually pretty good. It defends the knight and puts the queen on an active square. Personally, I prefer the move knight to g3. Let me explain why. It gains a tempo by threatening the bishop, and most importantly, it keeps defending this pawn on d4, right? When we play queen to f3, it's true that right now we have to defend the bishop. But our opponent also has to be careful, because they have to defend the d4 pawn. So I defend the bishop with the move e6 to develop my other bishop. My opponent defends the pawn with c3. See how simple that is, right? They defend the pawn with c3. And now from here, we need to think about what to do next. Very well. In this case, I had studied that against the move c3, the best option was knight to d7, so that I could later play knight to f6. That way, I have this knight defended by my other knight. In this case, my opponent plays the theoretical bishop to e3, properly defending this knight, and at some point threatening possible discovered attacks on my bishop, and I play knight to f6. Knowing what? Knowing that now, if my opponent wants, they can trade off all the pieces. Knight takes, which is what my opponent did in this case. Very important. What should we capture with? With the queen or with the knight? Well, it's super important, friends, that you capture with the queen. Why? Because this bishop is being attacked by two pieces. If we capture with the knight, it would simply be defended by the pawn, and we would lose a pawn. So my opponent also trades off the bishop. I capture with the queen because it's just a little bit better. If my opponent wants to trade queens, and in fact that's what they did, even though we have a doubled pawn structure, and it might seem like the game is already over and it's going to be really boring and end in a draw, right? Because it looks like we have a very similar position with a bishop and a knight. But that's really not the case. Careful, because this is where things get interesting. Now you're going to start understanding real chess. Don't be afraid to trade pieces many times, because you'll end up in an endgame. No. Here, you can learn a lot of things starting from this move. My opponent plays the best move. Bishop to f4. What are they aiming for with bishop to f4? It's very simple, right? What they want is to keep this amazing diagonal, because now I can't play bishop to d6 anymore. I'd have to play bishop to e7, and that bishop would end up very passive. So notice that this bishop doesn't have any other squares. So I come up with a plan to be able to develop my bishop. And the plan was as follows. I play knight to f6, improving my knight and threatening knight to d5, making my knight even better and threatening the bishop. My opponent realizes my plan and plays h3. For what purpose? So that after knight to d5, this bishop can be safely tucked away on h2 with no one to bother it. And now it becomes the master of this powerful diagonal, right? For scan. Yes. Oh, yes, Chestico. It's super fun. Yeah, honestly, I find this really fun. So my plan was as follows: to play the tremendous move, king to d7. Jessica, what are you doing moving the king to the center of the board? You're going completely crazy. Yes, I'm going completely crazy, but it's a really good move. Why? The king in the center of the board will be fine because there are no queens. And when there are no queens, the king is fine in the center, right? And now this king is supporting the d6 square to exchange the bishops. Do you see? Magnificent plan. And so my opponent will have to exchange the bishops no matter what because there's no escape for this bishop. My opponent castles queenside. Good move, because he's putting the rook on the same file as my king. Although for now it doesn't scare me. For now it doesn't scare me. And I play bishop to d6. It's extremely important to get rid of this dark squared bishop because it's a devilish bishop. As you can see, it takes over my whole position and cuts the board in half. Now then, my opponent has to decide between two things: either let it be taken or capture himself. Because if he plays g3, what he's really doing is dooming this bishop to have no life, right? So either he trades or lets the trade have it. Logically, the best thing is for my opponent to exchange bishop for bishop. Why? Because if he lets the exchange happen, this rook on h2 would end up in a terrible spot. And then I would be in a much better position. So my opponent plays bishop takes d6, I play king takes d6. And even though it might seem like the game is getting more and more boring, it's actually getting more exciting and interesting. And you'll see why in a moment. All right, after king takes d6, my opponent has to do something. What is my opponent trying to do? Well, in this case, he plays the logical knight f3. He develops a knight. I had already anticipated this. Now this knight can become very, very active. Where is my opponent's knight threatening to jump? For example, to g5, threatening this fork, or even more dangerous, to e5. So if I try to chase it away, it could reroute over here, come around this way, and start putting pressure on me, right? So knight to f3 threatens to really activate his knight. That's why I play the good and subtle move f6, understanding my opponent's plan. If we understand our opponent's plans, why is he developing the knight? Oh, they'll come over here, right? So I'm not going to centralize one of my rooks because then he could jump in just the same, right? So f6 here is the right move. Are we, for example, afraid that he'll attack this doubled pawn over here? Nah, then we would play g6, and this knight would be pretty much dead. How does the game continue? Well, the game continues as follows. My opponent wants to play c4, right? So he can break in the center and attack my king. There seems obvious, but then I could jump in here with the knight, start causing a little trouble with the knight here. Then over here, attacking this point, right? And my opponent wants to prevent all that. So he prepares the move c4 with the move g3. At first glance, if we don't understand the plans, we won't get why my opponent plays g3. But it's simple. It's just so my knight can't jump to f4. Notice that I'm trying to explain something complicated in a super simple way, so all of you can understand. But the game is getting more and more exciting. Now I realize this is the moment. The king here. Thank you. It's pretty safe, yes, for now, because now I go with a move of 5. A very good move. What do I want to do? Well, if my opponent tries to defend a little over here, then that's great for me, because he's just leaving a lot of holes for my knight to jump in, and he'll have very few chances to advance, since this pawn can't move forward because this one would fall. Honestly, I'd have a really good position. Of course, my opponent doesn't play 3, but instead hurries to play c4. That's something I already anticipated. c4 threatens my knight, so let's think about where we should place this knight, because we have 3 possible squares: b4, b6, and c7. Well, we also have the e7 square, sorry. Although by saying this, you already know that I didn't place my knight on e7. Why didn't I put my knight on the 7? Because it has no prospects. Here I couldn't get out, here either, and it would block the file that I want to use with my rook. If we put it here, they'll simply advance on us, and we'd have to go back. Because if we put it here, we're going to lose the knight. They'll trap it. So I don't think it's a good idea to jump to b4. Jumping to b6 seems even worse because they simply check us and take the knight. The best move is knight to c7. A completely correct move, knight to c7. I'm going to go through the moves here since I have the game here so I don't forget anything. And here my opponent plays rook from h to e1. Definitely a very good move. He places a rook that wasn't doing anything onto an open file. Naturally, I don't waste a second in taking control of the file as well. And here, I think, and this is just my opinion, friends, my opponent plays a move that's not all that strong. My opponent plays knight to h4, a move that at first glance threatens knight takes f5. It seems simple and wants to weaken my structure with g6, which is a forced move, right? And now what happens? My opponent now plays, in my opinion, his mistake of the game, which is f3. It's not a mistake that's going to lose material, but rather a positional mistake. I think here my opponent wanted to have everything under control with the pawns like this, but by advancing this pawn, what he's actually doing is leaving his knight without any squares. It should just go back to g2, and let's just say it's not going to have a very happy life. So here, after the move f3, a brilliant idea comes to my mind. My opponent is boxing himself in on this flank. This knight seems to have no life. So it's time to act. And what move do I act with? With b5. A wonderful move. If my opponent captures, he'll have an isolated pawn here that's going to be easy to attack. We could even capture with the knight. We'd be putting pressure here. We can advance the king, or bring in the rooks, and this pawn is going to suffer. Capturing doesn't seem like a good idea for white. Advancing is even worse, because then we could put the king on d5, blocking this backward pawn, and surely this pawn will be way too easy to capture. For example, with bishop 4 and knight to bishop 5, right? This is going to be way too easy to capture. So he can advance or capture. My opponent realizes this and plays the move b3. Very interesting. Now, what should I do? Notice how interesting the position is getting. I could capture this pawn, but that wouldn't be a good move, even though the move a4 occurred to me. Let's strike at the base, so that if he captures here, we're in the same situation as before, right? This pawn is left isolated, and that's fine. No matter how many captures there are on the board, don't worry, you just need to keep them under control, and that's it. How do you keep them under control? Well, look, if he captures here, I can take with the knight and nothing happens, or even with the pawn. If he captures here, if he captures here, I'd take with a rook and put a lot of pressure on these two pawns. That would be a monumental mistake. So my opponent decides to play king to b2, a move that at first glance seems reasonable. And this is where I spent the most time thinking during the game, because I wanted to find a winning plan, since here I see that pawns are opening up and files are opening for the king. Alright, I don't know which plan you all would choose. If you want, you can try pausing the video to think about it. These videos are really great for studying. You can watch them as many times as you need to really understand chess, and here I went with the plan that for me was the best. In fact, there were several plans that were pretty similar, right? But for me, the best was to first exchange this pawn, b takes c4, b takes c4, so that I open up the file. And now I play the intermediate move a3. A 3 seems really important to me, since I place a pawn on the opponent's third rank, which is the sixth rank, and what I want is to get a rook in. So now, if I played rook to b8, that would be a really good move. Why? Because I would be getting into the seventh rank, just like the pawn, right? Even so, if I play rook to b8 now, they're going to play rook takes rook, and they've already forced my rook away. Therefore, first rook takes e1, and now I don't have any exchanges here, rook to b8. Here I looked at my opponent's face, and I could already see that he didn't like how things were going. Why? Because even though it might look like a position that many of you might think is very drawish, this position is actually an advantage for black. It's an advantage for black, and it's pretty obvious. Why? Because I'm breaking in with rook to b2 with a huge threat. How can you defend against rook to b2, right? What's the threat? Rook to b2, check, and I take the pawn. With an extra pawn about to promote and this knight on the side, this is very comfortable for me. So my opponent can't let me break through on bt. If he plays rook to b1, which a lot of you are probably thinking about, I simply trade rooks. And knight to e6, and nobody can defend this pawn. Who can defend this pawn? And once this one falls, the next will too, and this is going to be an absolute steal for me. For those asking what an absolute steal means, especially those from Latin America, it just means something really great, okay? So he can't play rook to b1 to stop me from getting into b2. I thought he could play rook to a1, but that would be extremely passive. I would come in with the rook, and this pawn would definitely fall. Knight to a6, knight to b4. This is, well, extremely passive and just not a good idea for white. And after thinking and thinking, I came up with a pretty good solution for the white pieces. A solution that my opponent saw. Here, my opponent showed his class and played rook to e2. So that if I come in with rook to b2, the king simply moves away, right? And if I trade rooks, well, I haven't won any pawns here and absolutely nothing has happened. And here I really had to think for a while. I was considering coming in anyway, trading rooks to see what would happen, or letting them trade. I was also thinking about knight to e6, and in the end, I decided that this continuation was the most practical for me. Rook to b2, chick. The king has to defend the rook, for example, king to d3. And here I had two options, and I'm going to tell you both. So friends, let me know what you think of my decision. Here I had two options, either trade and go into an endgame, which you'll see now, with an extra pawn, or play knight to e6, which I really liked. But we had very little time on the clock, I have to say. And it was hard to calculate all of this, because after knight to e6, which seems like a really good move, I wasn't sure how it would all end up. It would probably go rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, king comes over here, I capture here, he captures here. So we end up pretty much equal in pawns, if not completely equal, and this passed pawn could be a real headache for me. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the following. Try to follow me, friends, just with my words, without moving the pieces. Pay attention, okay? My follow-up was the following. Rook takes rook, king takes rook, and now this king is here, very far from this pawn. Then knight to a6, the king can come over here, I come to give a check, the king comes over here, I come to take this pawn. I have an extra pawn, but the king positions himself here and attacks both my knight and my pawn. So, oops, I'm messing everything up. The king is here and the knight is here, right? So here everything is being attacked, but I have to follow up. Knight to c1 check, he takes my pawn, and knight to e2. And I attack two pawns at once. Whoa, chess teacher, I didn't follow you that. Don't worry, I'll show you, which is what I did in the game, right? I went into this variation where I ended up with an extra pawn. King takes rook, knight to a6. The king has to come over here to defend. He comes here, check. The king comes here, I take. For now, I have an extra pawn. But with this move, king to b3, he gets the pawn back. But I did find a continuation, like I told you before. Knight to c1 check, and now knight to e2. So that here, I'm winning a pawn anyway, right? Either I take the one on g3 or the one on d4, because you can't defend both at the same time. Very well. Here I could already see that my advantage was pretty significant, right? I'm going to end up in an endgame with an extra pawn. My opponent does the following. g4. I exchange this pawn first, and now I take this one, so I have an extra pawn. Here I have 1 against 1, but here I have 3 against 2, so things are looking good, but still, I have to play the hardest part of all. My opponent, logically, should try to bring the king over here. I'm going to check that I didn't make a mistake with my opponent's king move. My opponent played the king move. Let's see, I'm going to go a little further. He played the move king to b4. Very good. Logical move, right? He wants to try to create some threats. The move 5 doesn't bother me at all. I just play king to d5, and nothing has happened here, right? So what I do is play f5, creating a passed pawn. Whenever you have a 3 versus 2, a 4 versus 3, in other words, when you have a pawn majority, the passed pawn is created, pay attention, with the pawn that does not have an opponent. Got it? Remember this. The passed pawn is created with the pawn that doesn't have an opponent, in this case, the f-pawn. If he doesn't capture, this pawn is going to advance all the way to promotion, since the knight controls the other knight's retreat. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. And after the exchanges, my opponent plays king, c3. If you notice the cut in the video, it's because I'm recording this for the second time. The camera stopped recording me. It's absolutely fine. I'm recording it again. He's threatening my knight. This is an extremely important and crucial moment in the game, my friends. If my knight is under threat, I have to do something. Either move it or defend it, right? That's obvious. If I defend with c5, it seems like a good move. If I move away, that's not bad. The best moves are king e5 and king c5. The difference is simple. King to e5 gets closer to the passed pawn. Friends, it was the best option, even though it's not easy with just seconds on the clock. I played king to c5, and why? Well, because this is what went through my mind. If this king tries to come over here, which is his goal, to capture the pawn, I just take this one, and that's it. As long as I keep my king here, the opponent's king can't leave. And that was my reasoning. Although now, looking back, right, it would have been better to play king to e5, but it's fine. The game did get a lot more interesting. And I'm going to show you the final finish, which is going to fascinate you. It's the best part of the game. Knight to g2, an obvious move. I'm threatening to advance and promote. Knight to g2 is precisely to stop me from advancing. So, what do I play? If I need to protect this square to advance, knight to e6. Good move. If I move forward, I must be careful because my knight could be in danger. Knight to e6. Best move. I defend this square, and my opponent keeps playing with geometry. Knight to e1. And now he defends this square here and also threatens a possible discovered check. And here I see a continuation, my friends. That seemed like a winning one to me. Let's see what you all think. Now, looking back, I realize it's not the winning continuation. I'll tell you what I was thinking, okay? Knight to g5. I attack the pawn, right? h4, then his knight jumps to e4, check, and wherever the king goes, knight to d6. And who can stop this pawn? I'm threatening it with the knight, I'm threatening it with the king, and the other knight can't come to defend. Of course, after the move knight to g5, instead of playing h4, I saw it right away, with just seconds on the clock. It's not easy, and on top of that, we have to keep an eye on knight to d3. An in-between move with check. Well, I didn't see it, but it's no big deal. I move the king away, now the knight is threatening me for real, and I don't want to push it forward to avoid complicating things for myself because they could come in through here. I'd rather come to e6 to defend this spot here. Without a doubt, that seems like a much better move to me. King to d2, and now knight to c5. My plan with knight to c5 is simple. Trade the knights. Friends, if I trade the ponies, I've won the game. Worry, because without the knights, this pawn would just march forward on its own, and if they try to stop it, I'll just take this one and then promote the other. Easy. My opponent, obviously, doesn't want to trade knights. That's clear. I bring my king in to put on the pressure. He brings his king in to defend, and now I stick to my plan. I try to trade knights. If you don't want to, that's fine. I'll just keep putting the squeeze on you. He brings his king here, and my life, winning plan begins. You're gonna love this. His plan is fantastic, and this is where the best part of the game starts. Even though this might look really dull, this is actually the best part of the game, folks. First, Cert 5. I locked this pawn here, so now my opponent can't advance this pawn anymore. And now my opponent can only attack with the knight, and this pawn is super well defended. I've got everything well defended. And now, what's my plan? Well, my plan is as follows. King to e7. King to f6. And here, my opponent should have played king to g3, since he can see I'm heading this way. But instead, he plays king to e3. Mistake. Why? Even if he sees that after king to g6, king to f3, and king to h5, which happened in the game, he could simply defend the pawn with g3. He actually can't. And here comes the weapon that Nimzovich always talked about. The passed pawn can be sacrificed at the decisive moment. Decisive. If he tries to defend with king to g3, 4 wins the game. We force my opponent to capture, because if he goes this way, this pawn promotes. If he goes the other way, I take the pawn. So he has to capture, and after the exchange of knights, I take this pawn, winning endgame. So my opponent, after king to h5, realized, friends, that he couldn't play king to g3. And that's when he started to struggle, because he was low on time, and I was going to take this pawn if he didn't stop me. And he couldn't stop me, so he played knight to f4. Well, I simply exchanged it. You already know that if I exchange pawns, I win the game. Thank you. King takes h4, king takes f5, and here, simply king to g3 wins the game. Why? Because if he tries to come over to stop this one, I'll just take the other pawn and promote, right? And if he tries to come this way to get a passed pawn, I get there way before he does. And I'll explain why. Here, he could move over here, but it would be check when I promote, so it's better on the d6 square. But even so, friends, look how easy it is. Just here. I have nothing to worry about, and I still have 2 moves to stop this pawn. Pretty simple, right? For example, he could come to give checks. I give a lot of checks until my opponent, sorry, has to leave. And when my opponent leaves, I have to try to place a queen around here. How can I do that? Well, now it's not such an easy task, huh? You can do it however you want, but for example, let me think. If my opponent comes this way, well, I place the queen here, the king stands in front of the pawn, I bring my king over because now the pawn can't advance. And when he leaves, for example, I pin the pawn so it can't move forward. He has to come back here, I bring my king in, and I'm going to take this pawn without any problem at all. So I hope you really enjoyed this kind of video. These types of videos will really help you improve your chess skills. If you want more videos like this, all you have to do is leave a like or a comment. That's the only way I have to know that you like these videos. So I hope you really enjoyed this kind of video. I hope we're doing well in the tournament so far. We're in first place, but there is still a lot of rounds left. And I'll see you tomorrow in the next video, friends. Goodbye.